Hi, I'm Gareth Green. People often get in touch to say things like, what do I really need to know about theory? Or I love playing music, I just don't understand theory. Or I'm trying to write some music, but if only I knew something about how to write it down, how to write a melody, how to deal with chords, this kind of thing. So what are the essentials of music theory? And I thought it might be useful just to kind of list those for you and just talk through them briefly, because it'll be a kind of checklist and you can look at it and think, yeah, I think I know all about that, or I know something about that, but do I know everything about that? And it'll be a way of just sort of seeing, well, where are you up to? Where might the holes be in your theoretical knowledge? So the first thing I flagged up is notation of pitch and rhythm. Certainly if you're intending to write down a piece that you're composing, or if you are a player who wants to read music, you need to know, what are the notes on the staves? What's the rhythm? How do we write it down? How can we look at a rhythm and know how to play it or sing it? If I've got a rhythm in my head, how do I write it down? So what is there to know about pitch and rhythm and how to write it down? Even basic things like, if I put a dot after a note, what does it do to the note? Okay, adds on half the value of the note, this kind of stuff. So anything to do with notation of pitch and rhythm. When it comes to rhythm, not just the rhythm, but actually how do you kind of organize the notes in the music and which notes attach to which other notes, all that kind of stuff. Notes inside the stave, notes on ledger lines up and below the stave, all that kind of stuff. So notation of pitch and rhythm, I'd say, is probably a pretty key thing that you need to know in your music theory knowledge if it's going to be useful to you. What are we going to add to that? Accidentals, so sharps, flats, double sharps, double flats, natural signs, all that kind of stuff. When do I need them? How do I write them? What effect does it have on the music? Lots of people will think, yeah, I kind of know about that stuff. But there's also this thing about, well, why should I write F double sharp? Why don't I just call it G? Well, because if you're in the key of G sharp minor, for example, the 7th degree of the scale is an F sharp that has to be raised a semitone, so it has to become an F double sharp. You've already got one kind of G, you've got a G sharp, so you can't have a G natural and a G sharp in the same key and no kind of F. One of them needs to be an F, that's the F double sharp. One needs to be a G, that's the G sharp. So accidentals, what do they do? How do you write them down? Why do we need to use these accidentals instead of those accidentals? All that kind of stuff would be another topic. Then here's a third one. Time signatures, you know, all this at the beginning of a piece of music. How many beats have you got in a bar or a measure? And what kind of beats are they? And how do you write those and express them as a time signature? And once you've chosen your time signature, well, how do the notes get beamed together? You know, you can have 4 quavers or 4 eighth notes. Well, should they be beamed together as a group of 4, or should they be 2 and 2, or should they be something else? All sorts of kind of theoretical rules about that, which seem at one level to be fairly boring. They're a little bit tedious to learn, but the idea is that anyone reading the music and playing it will immediately be able to see where the beats are inside a bar or a measure, and it will just really help them to play. Because if you get beaming that's wrong, it's amazingly confusing. You suddenly think, oh, I think a beat is there, but oh no, it isn't actually, because so it's all about that. Rests, you know, when do we need rests? How many rests do you need? Should you write 1 rest, 2 rests, 3 rests, you know, all this kind of stuff. So these are all real nuts and bolts issues of music theory. And if you're a performer, well, do you understand what these things mean? Are you playing a piece of music in 4/4 time when actually it's written in 2/2 time? And plenty of people have said this to me over the years. No difference. 4/4, there are 4 crotchet beats per bar, or 4 quarter note beats per measure. But 2/2 is just the same. If you've got 2 minims or 2 half notes, that's the same as 4 crotchets or 4 quarter notes. It is and it isn't. Mathematically, it's the same. Musically, it's a bit different. In 4/4, you're feeling 4 beats in a bar or a measure. In 2/2, you're feeling 2 beats in a bar or a measure. So all this kind of stuff is really important for performers and for composers. What are we going to add next? Well, once you've got a grip on those fundamentals, it's a really good idea to know this thing called the circle of fifths. The great thing about the circle of fifths is it shows you Now, there is a scheme into which everything fits. It tells you all your major keys, all your minor keys. If you're thinking, what's the key signature for A major? It will tell you that. If you're thinking, what's the key that's got 4 flats? It will tell you that. And so it kind of gets to grips with every single key, every single scale, every single major key, every single minor key, which major keys are related to which minor keys, which keys are neighboring keys of other keys. It's really, really useful stuff. So you can get all your scales, all your keys sorted out, and you're in business. Lots of people just play or write music in C major because they think, oh, I'm a bit frightened of sharps and flats. You don't need to be frightened of sharps and flats if you know your circle of fifths, and then learn to apply it. And other things like chromatic scales might be in the mix there. What comes next? Intervals. Well, intervals, the distance between pairs of notes. You know, we call this interval a perfect fifth. We call this one a major third. So, you know, what are all these different intervals? Why are some major? Why are some minor? Why are some perfect? Why are some augmented? Why are some diminished? How do you work all that stuff out? Does it matter? Yes, it does. So it's a kind of good opportunity just to think, yeah, okay, let's get to grips with these intervals. How do I write them down? How do I hear them when I'm playing them? If I see an interval, do I kind of hear that interval in my head before I play it? You know, all this stuff, really useful. Next, transposition. What's transposition? Taking a piece of music in one key and moving it into another key. So if I've got a piece of music in F major, well, can I play something in F major, but then could I play it in G major or any other key? So moving from one key to another. Useful thing for a composer to do. Okay, lots of these things can be done using software these days, that's true. But we've got transposing instruments, people who play in different keys from the rest of the world. So quite useful to know about them and how all that fits together. You might even be someone who plays something like a clarinet or a trumpet or a French horn or something that is a transposing instrument. Well, you're reading certain notes, but which notes are actually coming out of your instrument? You might be accompanying one of these bods thinking, why am I playing in this key and they're playing in that key? Or the transposition in the score might be wrong, so you need to work out what's going on. Sometimes you've got a piece of music, it's a bit too low, a bit too high for a singer. You might need to transpose it, move it into a different key so a singer can cope with it. But loads of reasons why you might want to know about transposition. What's next on simple and compound time? Two fundamentally different kind of impacts, where simple time uses beats that sort of naturally divide in two. Compound time uses beats that naturally divide into three. So how does all that stuff work? I find a lot of people are really hazy about this, and they're trying to write pieces of music in simple time that should be in compound time and vice versa. People reading pieces of music in compound time and playing them in simple time causes no end of confusion. Actually, it's not that complicated to grasp, but simple and compound time, useful to know about. Technical names for the degrees of the scale. Well, you know, we can go up a scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. We can say first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree, fifth degree, sixth degree, seventh degree, back to the first degree. But we've also got technical names: tonic, supertonic, median, subdominant, dominant, submedian, leading note, back to the tonic. So names of the degrees of the scale, names of chords are based on the same system. So when someone talks about a dominant chord, what are they on about? You know, so if we know these things, we quickly get to grips with, I know exactly what they're talking about. So it's a fairly quick thing to learn, but it's a useful thing to know. Enharmonic equivalence. Oh my goodness, that sounds complicated. It's not as complicated as it sounds once again. Enharmonic equivalence are saying this note is G sharp, but it's also A flat. So in other words, it sounds the same, but it's got a different name. Why is it called G sharp in this key? Why is it called A flat in that key? Well, that all takes us back to the circle of fifths and what we need for each key and so on. But sometimes we need to know which enharmonic we're writing when we're composing. Sometimes you're playing a piece and you think C double sharp, what's that? If you know, actually it's the same as D. There may be a reason for calling it C double sharp, but it's the same as D. Well, when I play it, I can just think D. So understanding enharmonic equivalence is a useful thing. 4 clefs. Oh my goodness, I thought there was only 1 or only 2. Well, a lot of people have come across the treble clef or the bass clef or possibly both. But then we have the alto clef and the tenor clef. So if you play the viola, you play in the alto clef almost your entire life. If you play the cello, well, you'll spend some of your time playing in the tenor clef when you're not playing in the bass clef or in the treble clef. Same for the bassoon. So actually, knowing these 4 clefs, quite a useful thing to know about. You certainly you want to be able to get around a treble and a bass clef, but useful to know the alto and the tenor clefs as well. What's next? Well, we've referred to these triads and chords. What are triads? Obviously 3 notes that make a triad. How do you turn triads into chords? What kind of chords are there? What can you do with chords? Lots of people get in touch with me saying, I've got this wonderful tune that I've written. I have no idea what to do with the chords, the harmony for it. So this is kind of just having a base knowledge in triads and chords. What are the different kind of triads? How do you convert them into chords? What are inversion chords? What are kind of enhanced chords, extended chords, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot to know about there, but just having a basic grip on that gets you a long way. Out of that, the topic of cadences. You know, when we come to the end of a musical phrase, the music kind of settles and it's kind of musical punctuation. So if you need in your piece of music a full stop or a comma or a question mark, you use this thing called a cadence. So what are these cadences? What are my options? How do they work? How do I write them? How do I spot them in a piece of music I'm reading? How do I feel them in a piece of music I'm playing? Really important. Lots of people, when they play a piece, they get on at the first measure and they just play notes, 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 and then stop. Actually, the music didn't breathe. We didn't feel any cadence point. So that's a good thing to know about if you're a performer or a composer. Phrase structure. Music is organized in phrases, in musical sentences. So where are these phrases? How long should they be? How does one phrase relate to another phrase? So phrases, pretty important stuff to know about. Basic analysis. Now, analysis is a whole topic of itself, and there are all sorts of analysis techniques and things, and you can go really deep with it. But actually, all you need to be able to do at first is just do a kind of basic analysis. I'm playing a piece of music. It's got one section, it's got a contrasting section, then the first section comes back again. A, B, A. It's called ternary form. Right, if we know that, we can find out what belongs to what in the structure. So when we play it, we can convey that ternary form. So we need to know a little bit about some of that stuff. If we're writing a piece of music, do we just spew notes onto a page or just improvise notes until we've had enough? Or do we organize the structure in some way that makes sense? We need to be able to think analytically about that. What about instruments of the orchestra? What are all these instruments? What notes can they play? What's the bottom note? What's the top note? What any particular kind of techniques? Which clef do they play in? Can you pluck a violin? Yes, you can. Can you pluck a trumpet? No, you can't. So kind of what are these instruments? What do we need to know about them? Because if we're going to write for them, we need to know something about it. If we're going to play these instruments, we know our own instrument, but what are the other instruments about that we're playing alongside? Do we know about those? How do the instruments fall into sections, strings, wind, brass, percussion, all this kind of stuff? So useful to know a bit about that. Terms and symbols. Well, all sorts of funny signs in the music, aren't there? But, we find ourselves using quite a lot of Italian words in music, but we also have some French and some German words around, depending on what kind of piece you're playing. So do we know what these words mean, or do we just happily play a piece very kind of joyfully, not realizing there's a French word at the beginning that means play sadly? So we miss the mood of the thing. So not a bad idea just to know a few keywords. You don't have to be a gifted linguist. You just have to know a few keywords that keep coming up. Ornaments, all these things, trills, mordants, turns, what are they? How do you play them? When I see these funny little squiggly signs on the music and things like this, what do I have to do with them? Kind of useful when you're playing, When you're writing, you might think, actually, what this needs is an ornament. I'll put a turn in there or a trill in here. So we need to know a bit about ornaments. So that is the ground that you need to cover in order just to have a kind of fairly safe nuts and bolts knowledge of music theory. So that's been a pretty whistle-stop tour through the list. But have a look at that list now and think, do I know about these things? Do I know about some of these things? Are there things there that I don't know anything about at all? Are there things there that I think, yeah, I've always been confused by that? Well, if you're sort of thinking, yeah, I perhaps need to do something about theory, I would suggest that this is the list that you go for. Well, if you really want to get sorted on all this stuff, have a look at www.mmcourses.co.uk, because we've got theory courses that cover all of the syllabus for each grade of theory exams. You may want to be taking the exams, you may not want to take the exams, but just know something about this stuff. Now, 1 to 5, the material for grades 1 to 5 is all this kind of nuts and bolts stuff that I've been talking about. So you can get them as individual courses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have a bundle with all of grades 1 to 5 in one bundle. And if you want to go for the bundle, we'll even give you 20% off. How about that? A 20% discount. Absolutely amazing. If you're sort of thinking, I think I sort of know this stuff, but I could do with revising it, and then I'd like to go on and do more, well, have a look at our 1 to 8 theory bundle course, which comes with a staggering 30% discount if you want to go for that, and that will cover all the ground. What's in these courses? Online video courses where I teach all the material. You'll see me write things down, you'll hear me play it, explain everything. There are quizzes to try, to kind of see what your knowledge is doing with all that stuff. And then you'll be in a much stronger position with your music theory. So have a go for looking at that stuff. Certainly go on to the website there, see what there is. There are lots of other things on there as well. And then have a look at these things and think, is that what I need to sort myself out with my music theory?